My name is Scott Gerlach. I represent a private with the 4th Armored Division 25th Recon Battalion, which operated in Europe during World War II. Since July, they made landings at Normandy. They didn't go in with the first waves. They were involved in several battles in the liberation of Europe. They received the Presidential Unit Commendation for their bravery. I'm going to talk about some of the equipment that I carry. Typically, my role would be as a forward spotter for artillery and the tank battalion. We would go out using jeeps or half tracks, try to spot the enemy tanks, guide our men in with their tanks so that we can engage the enemy. Start off with the rifle I carry is an M1 Garand rifle. It is semi-automatic, fires 8 rounds of ammunition. Most of the ammunition is either carried on a cartridge belt that held 10 in-block clips that carried 8 rounds of ammunition each. When we loaded the rifle, we would seat the magazine and that would load it. The weapon would fire semi-automatically. I'm going to go ahead and cycle a few rounds. The problem with this rifle that the U.S. troops came across was when you got down to the last round, which is going to happen now, that loud noise happened. So if you were engaging an enemy and they heard that, they knew you were out of ammunition. And it's a pretty loud sound, even when there's rifle fire going on. So to try to combat that, U.S. troops would typically pair up with a buddy and try to make sure that they weren't both running out of ammunition at the same exact time. Because a lot of times an enemy that was in hiding would wait till they heard that sound, then engage. Next thing we're going to talk about is some of the equipment I'm carrying. Bayonet that the typical man was carrying during World War II was a 10-inch bayonet, which would affix at the end of the rifle. Europe didn't see much use of bayonets in combat. They typically was a weight that we carried around. But in the Pacific, the Marine Corps and the Army that was involved there was a lot more hand-to-hand combat with the Japanese troops. So bayonets were much more used in that position. The next thing I'm carrying as a weapon is a rifle grenade launcher. A rifle grenade adapter would be attached to the end of the rifle. The United States during World War II, and they use these throughout Korea, used 2 types of rifle grenades. One type would be an anti-personnel grenade. It would slide on the end of it. The soldier would use blank ammunition similar to what we use in reenactments. I'm carrying the sight for this on the front of my belt. The sight will be attached to this side of the rifle. Okay. Typical, if I was wanting to attack an enemy position, typically this was used whenever a hand grenade was too far to throw. This would probably fire a grenade anywhere between 100 and 150 yards that way. The way it works, I would pull the firing pin mechanism on the grenade, which it has a block on it to prevent it from going off on the rifle that way. I would load 1 round of blank ammunition into the rifle, close the breech. This couldn't be fired from the shoulder position because this weapon weighs almost a pound. It would probably knock your shoulder off or dislocate it if you fired it from this position. Typically a soldier would be on the ground in a prone position. He would use his sight to line up the target. There's a level on the top of that so I'd have an idea. Someone with a lot of experience with this would know exactly what degree to use based on the range they were trying to fire this weapon. Then the weapon would be fired. Okay. The next thing I'm carrying in my equipment, this is actually called a gas mask bag. After the landings in D-Day, they knew the Germans weren't going to use gas. It was initially thought that they probably would in order to defend Europe. But most soldiers carried this as almost like a ditty bag then, to carry their food, spare ammunition, things like that. They typically chunked their gas mask bags as soon as they got off the boats on the beaches of Normandy. Next thing, one of the more important things is a canteen. I always have a canteen. Typically GIs carry 2. I keep an extra one inside the largest pack on my back. This is called a musette bag. Later in World War II in Europe, typical infantrymen would carry the musette bag. Actually, this got started with paratroopers carrying this. Whenever they would have their equipment attached, typically on their backs there was a large parachute. So this bag can be released. It starts off with a ring right? Thrown over your shoulder like this. So when they came down, the bag would be in this position. And they take off their parachute pack, flip it back over, and then reattach your straps. And that way they've got all their stuff and they could leave their parachute harness on the ground that way. But many infantrymen started carrying it because it's much more functional than the early backpacks that were used during World War II. They were issued to the infantrymen. Typically they were leftovers from World War I. That was one of the things that when the United States went into World War II, they weren't really well prepared for it. They had actually, when we look at the numbers, the country of Iraq had more soldiers in their army than the United States did in 1941, at the beginning of the war. But by the end of the war, we had the largest army in the world, so that just shows the ingenuity and determination of the American soldiers. Last thing I carried is an entrenching tool. This was really important in Europe because we had to dig a lot of foxholes, and so it can be turned sideways and used as a pick to dig in, like that, or it can be adjusted, used as a shovel. There were times, especially in France, in the first couple months of the war, when they were doing a lot of fighting in an area called the hedgerow area of Normandy, where it was progress that they actually gained about a mile per day. So there was a lot of exchange of ground initially, so foxholes were really important for the GI in order to stay alive. The jacket I'm wearing is actually, it's called an M43 jacket. It was issued in around September of 1944 to help prepare for the winter that's coming on. This jacket can be worn with a liner to make it more winterized. The pants I'm wearing is a style called HBT. Typically, the GI was issued a wool uniform and a set of HBTs, which are cotton material. It stands for herringbone twill, which is the type of material that's worn. Typically, they wore their wool pants on the bottom and these over the top that way. In the heat of the Pacific, typically the soldiers only wore these type of material because the cotton is a lot lighter weight and it absorbs water easier. The boots I have on are a pair of standard issue russet brown 3/4 cut boots, and they wore leggings over the top of them to help protect the lower legs. And I think that is everything.
All right, well, thank you very much.
No, you're welcome.